Welcome, everyone. My name is Lynette Davis with LynetteDavis.com, and I'm excited to introduce my guest to you. I started bragging on Alexis last month when I was doing my blog on anxiety management and how Lynette is operating in times of pandemic and trying to manage my anxiety. And I mentioned that I had started taking up meditation again for the zillionth time. But this time is working out. And the reason why it's working out is here with me. So I'm really excited to introduce you all to Alexis. So really quick, I met Alexis through the Mystic Soul Project, which is a nonprofit organization. And in 2019, I went to their second conference, I believe. And that's where I met Alexis. And we met in a pre-conference event for people who were spirit care providers, mental health providers, basically people who are healing practitioners in some form or fashion. And I instantly took a liking to him, and well, here we are. So welcome, Alexis. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Lynette. It's so good to be here. I appreciate the invite. So my name is Alexis Francisco. I use he and they pronouns. I'm based in the Bronx, New York right now. I find my way here by way of Santiago, República Dominicana, on the island of Haiti in the Caribbean. And that is important to name because that is my people here in New York. I am a social worker by trade. I also have a master's in divinity, so I do spiritual accompaniment work, not necessarily inside of institutional religious space anymore, but outside of that. And I'm also an organizer by trade, have been working as an organizer in the Bronx for about 7 or 8 years. And so my work generally in my life kind of attempts to bring these three things together and, integrate healing, spirituality, and social change work in the ways that we can, creating community spaces that allow for that to happen. And so, Lynette and I have reconnected through one of the spaces that I've been holding more recently, which is the Sunset Meditation Space, which is a virtual meditation space on Saturday evenings, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more after that. But primarily right now, I work as a therapist in a politicized setting, right? So alongside some organizing for workers that are transforming their industry here in New York. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So I like that you mentioned that you are holding like these three different things. And yeah, I want to touch into those because so often, I'll speak for myself. I have been trying so desperately to fit myself into one box, right? Because it's like master something. All right, let me try to stuff myself into this one little place. And rather than really embracing all of who I am. So I love how like you naturally feel like these are the different components of my life, and this is all of my work. And it was just natural.
I mean, it sounds natural. That's been a journey too, right? Because the world will actually try to demand that you split those things off, right? And so oftentimes when we want to integrate those things, we have to really fight for the space to do so and create it ourselves more often than not. So I'm grateful that it sounds natural because I feel that's like a really deep intention of mine to not have these elements of the commitments that I hold sort of like end up in different spaces. But how can I integrate them as much as possible? Because I feel like they're necessary. They are already integral to how we live and move. And oftentimes what we need in order to heal requires those three things to be together. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I am getting there. I'm not there yet. I'm still.
I feel the same way.
I'm like, I need to work on to stop compartmentalizing things, but I'm like, I feel like I'm in good company. So
listen, we'll figure it out together. That's really what we do,
Right on. So as I shared in my last vlog, I have been, and you just shared, I have been coming to your sunset meditation. And I'm looking at this history that you have with being classically trained in social work. So
Mm.
how do you go from training in social work to getting into meditation?
Yeah, well, the meditation element, my practice in meditation actually came before my training in social work. And it had to do with my own healing journey, actually. So in 2010, I began a process of healing from an experience of addiction that I happened to find like a path to healing from addiction that integrated spirituality into that, recognized that oftentimes the source of the sort of addictive behavior or addictive attachment that we have to a substance, sometimes with addiction it's a substance, that's the one that's usually most visible, right? But sometimes our addictions are to other things, right? Food, sex, thinking processes, relationships, whatever it might be, right? And really at the root of that usually is an attempt to like deal with pain and suffering, right? And so I happened to find a pathway to healing from that experience of addiction that invited me to re-explore my relationship to spirituality. I had like about every hang up that you can imagine with organized religion because I had experienced a lot of trauma in the religious spaces that I was raised in, very kind of traditional, like Catholic, Christian, the kind of Christianity that you see in the Spanish speaking Caribbean, which is often very, oppressive and repressive. And so I was like, cool, I'm down with the spirituality stuff, but I will not go anywhere near those things. And so I started to explore some other ways of being spiritual. One of the blessings of being in New York is that there's a lot of like accessible space, like it's different from a lot of other spaces. So I feel really grateful and privileged in that way. And so I happened to find my way to like a Buddhist meditation center here in New York. I knew nothing about meditation. There happened to actually be like a recovery meeting that was in that space. So they integrated meditation into the addiction recovery process. And so that was my first experience of meditation. Low key, actually, my first meditation that I can remember was like my first day sober, which, as you can imagine, is probably the most chaotic experience inside of my body. I'm terrified. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do. And here I'm being invited to actually just sit with myself, and that was actually deeply transformative. As uncomfortable as it was, I was like, oh, wow, like I can actually, for these 5 minutes, I could actually be with myself, and so I just became so hungry to learn more. And so I got really interested in Buddhist tradition and this conversation that happens in the Buddhist tradition on suffering and the causes of suffering and the meditation as like a tool of training our awareness so that we can kind of break some of those cycles of attachment, which felt really connected to my experience of addiction healing. Right? It's like, how do we interrupt some of those cycles that can feel like they have so much momentum that we can't get out of it? And yet my big kind of hurdle with that, the reason that I probably didn't stay in those communities was because those spaces, I very quickly realized, were incredibly white and class privileged spaces. And so I felt just totally like an outcast in the space. I could not see myself. I could not see my people. I did not understand how to have a conversation about suffering that did not take the very realities of like racism and poverty and all these things that we're surviving on a day-to-day basis into account. And so I couldn't stay there, and that kind of, so I'm like, again, kind of like, wow, this was really great. And now I have to get out of here for my own survival. What do I do now? And that started kind of my personal practice, my study, self-study, my interest in kind of connecting with, well, what are the elements of this that just has like really deeply transformed my life that I can find in some of the traditions that are practiced in my communities, discovering that there are many, many ways to meditate, right? Or to do the thing that meditation invites us to do. Not all of it is silent, right? Some of it is very active, some of it is very loud, some of it is engaged in movement. And that lo and behold, these practices are like deeply embedded in the cultural traditions of my own people and our communities. I spent some time where I went back into the Christian tradition, particularly to access the kind of more contemplative elements of that tradition that I had no idea existed, you know, and that sort of was my journey through seminary and continuing to kind of find my path um, in the world of spirituality. I no longer practice in the Christian tradition, and I'm no longer in a traditional ministerial role. I now practice in an African traditional religion, particularly Lukumi Orisha tradition, which is you know has been a tremendously powerful reconnection with kind of this ancestral practice. And still meditation is a core part of how I engage my spiritual practice, my mental health practices, and I try as I'm able to kind of help create spaces for a community to do that alongside, and like we say in Mystic Soul often, like co-teach and co-learn with each other, right? So I see myself much more as a facilitator of the space where folks get to come in and share their wisdom with each other. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about sunset meditation in particular, but Mystic Soul obviously has played a big role in how I conceptualize this now. Other spaces that I have been in where I've had the opportunity to learn and grow alongside some of my teachers and guides. And so this is the journey that has kind of led me to. And as a social worker, obviously, I think this has a huge impact in how we can care for our mental health, right? There's a way in which we can sometimes look at meditation in a decontextualized way and like kind of divorce it from its spiritual, traditional, cultural roots. For me, that's really critically important. And it's not kind of like a panacea fix all, that folks can use, to just, it's just going to fix everything at the drop of a hat, And also it can be a really powerful tool to increase our well-being. And so that's part of what gets me really excited about meditation. I found it tremendously useful in my own life.
Yeah, that every time I hear some of your story, I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so much in common. I've blogged about the fact that I'm in 12-step recovery, and I have been for a while. Actually, I just celebrated 5 years. So
Congratulations.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, as I'm with the Religious Society of Friends. So instead of going into meditation, while I was in recovery, went and got invited through somebody who was also in recovery to a Quaker meeting, which it was completely silent. And I was like, what is going on here? So I was really feeling your words when you were talking about your first day of sobriety and you're sitting with yourself in this space, like, okay. So, I'm glad that you stuck with it, because if you didn't, we would not have a space where I feel as though meditation is becoming something that feels right for me in my life. And I don't know if it's because of the timing and I'm finally open to it. But I've tried meditation before. Admittedly, I have not been in spaces where I got to experience meditation in the way that you present it. And so I think that might have been what the difference maker was. So you were talking about the sunset meditation. What prompted you to start it? And I'm going to write how I saw it when I first was scrolling down Facebook, and the Facebook algorithm blessed me with actually seeing your post, because you never know. You described it as a politicized healing space for us to connect, ground, and center in community. Tell me about this politicized healing space. You said that earlier too.
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit before I say more about sunset meditation, this notion of politicized healing is, it's actually somewhat of an artificial term, right? Because obviously our healing is political, right? And the only reason we need to use it is because so much of mainstream healing spaces have attempted to kind of strip the political from from healing space, as if it's some sort of outside issue, right? When the reality is that like the systems of oppression and violence and the political decisions, the consequences of which we're living in and surviving every day, have a huge impact on both our experiences of harm and our ability and, you know, ways by which we can access healing, right? And so when I talk about politicized healing, it's about literally bringing that recognition and awareness into the space, right? That the political realities that we're living in as marginalized people, as people of color, as queer and trans folks, need to be a part of the conversation around our experiences of pain and suffering and our experiences of healing. And we actually, in that way, kind of unveil the root causes of many of the experiences of harm that we have experienced that we're seeking to heal from, right? And not only that, but we also, so we can, that like then moves us into action to like dismantle those systems, right, as much as we can and in the ways that we can, but also allows us to like together begin to envision the world that we want to create in its place, right? The systems, the institutions, the communities that we need and want and deserve to live in, so that we don't have to experience the things that we've experienced and future generations don't have to experience those things, right? And so, you know, it invites that to be a part of the conversation because it already is a part of the conversation. It's just sometimes intentionally, like, you know, it's kind of one of those ways that we kind of spiritually try to bypass the realities of lived experience. And for BIPOC folks, for queer and trans folks, like that's not possible, nor is it healthy or helpful for our well-being. And so that gets to be a part of the conversation in sunset meditation, and it needs to be, right? So sunset meditation is a space that came into being at the beginning of the pandemic. You know, New York City had just gone into, you know, lockdown. It was last, you know, March 2020. We had no idea yet what was happening or what, you know, in my lifetime, I never experienced the city of New York stop. I had never, you know, I had no idea what was happening or what was coming. There was so much change happening. Suddenly I was working from home. I didn't know if I was going to keep my job. I didn't know if my family, my people, my parents were going to get sick. You know, I didn't know if I was going to get sick. You know, we just had no idea what was happening. And so it became really clear to me that I needed to be really intentional about the practices that help me be with uncertainty at that scale. Like uncertainty and I are not that cool, you know, like we just, you know, just the way I'm built, you know, I need to like actively be in the practice of centering myself when I'm experiencing a lot of uncertainty, because I tend to just kind of like, that is very unnerving to me, you know? And so I was like, cool, like this means with all of this, we have no idea what's coming. We're facing kind of like a big ambiguous kind of void of, we know that something very significant is happening, and knowing the realities of the political systems that we live in, when there's a mental health crisis at this scale, you know, it's going to impact our communities in a very particular kind of way. And I want to be as centered as I can to respond to the needs of the moment. So that means I got to up my spiritual practices and up the practices that help me be with uncertainty, so that I can respond choicefully. And so I was like, cool, I want to like carve out a time during the week that I know I'm going to be in practice. And I would love to be able to do this in community. And so, you know, I just put out the call, like, you know, I'm going to hold this space. I didn't know if anybody was going to come, you know, like, and then folks have come, and what it's become, you know, is a space, especially back then when we were very, very, very isolated from one another. You know, even folks that lived in the same community were like unable to necessarily be physically present. It gave us an opportunity to both like check in with ourselves, to be in practice, to be in a practice that can help us be in the present moment, right? And to like connect with each other, to share about what's happening in our lives, to like first and foremost, what I say in our spaces, like first and foremost, check in with ourselves, right? Because we were dealing with so much that it, you know, I know for me, I could go easily 2 weeks without even really knowing what's going on with me, you know, to like drop in, check in, to be able to share about it and be witnessed by people. And there were folks calling in from all over the country and all, you know, and even from international spaces. Like folks were really, you know, this became accessible for us to be connected and be in practice together in a way that we didn't have available to us before. So, and so we've been meeting almost every Saturday since, from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern, on Zoom. Folks have, taken on carving out a little bit of time to to be in practice and to be in connection with each other. And then also think about, what do we want to carry into the next week, right? How do we want to move intentionally into the week to come, right? So it kind of like resources us and sets us up to move intentionally into what's coming, based on what we are able to reflect on and be in practice about in the space.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so I didn't get wind of the sunset meditation until I think this year, because I'm very new to it. And I don't think I even came the first time I saw it. I was like, hey, I'm going to come eventually.
Yeah, that's the thing too, right? Is like it's there. We're there for folks as it becomes available and possible for folks to come in. So it's not as if, once you start, you got to come every week, or, folks, there are some folks who have come and made a consistent practice out of it. And there are folks who drop in and they're able to practice when they can. And like, the intention is for the space to be there. And when it's right for folks to be able to join, they can. And it's kind of like low expectation in that way, because I think sometimes we can kind of get in our heads about it, like, well, I didn't go, or and it's like, none of that, no shame, no, like, whatever, we want to just have a space available. And the other beautiful thing about it is, it's primarily like BIPOC folks, QTPOC folks in the space. And that's been really interesting for me, because it's not necessarily like that was the parameters in which the space was created.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, it just happens to, probably having to do with like my communities and the networks that I'm a part of. But it's also, it's been very beautiful and powerful that it has been a primarily, a lot of the I think it's super important for us to have spaces that center QTPOC folks and BIPOC folks, because oftentimes we're kind of in the margins of spaces like these, right? And it's been important and beautiful that Sunset Meditation has been that, and is that kind of space. And maybe it's the nature of the conversations that we have, the folks that are present. But it's interesting because it's never been like, this is a queer BIPOC.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
I froze a little bit.
Yeah. I'm like, we froze. We're back.
Yeah, but yeah, that is an an intention, and it is beautiful that we have that kind of space available for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't remember anything in your advertisement. Well, I'll just roll with that word. It was really a social media post that said anything about this is a BIPOC or QTPOC only space. So it felt as though it was welcoming, but it was interesting because I do remember my first one. I was sitting there and I was like, oh, I wonder what kind of people this space is going to attract, because you kind of never know. And I think for the most part, I noticed that it was mostly people of color. Yeah, I would say my first time there, whoever had the camera on, I had made the assumption that everybody there was a person of color. Now, whether or not they were LGBTQIA, I don't know. It's not always very obvious what somebody's orientation is. And I'm definitely myself kind of partially new to going to spaces that are exclusive for I would say QTPOC more than anything. And I came up in a Black church, so it wasn't anything new for me to be in pretty much only Black spaces. But as I got older, I started realizing in these spiritual spaces that weren't those traditional Christian spaces that I came up in, I saw less and less. And it would be one thing or the other. It would be, well, this is the queer space, but there were no brown people in it. Okay, well, this is a brown space, but they weren't very open to anybody who wasn't good old straight or anything like that. And it was like, I'm like, I don't want to be in the either or kind of space because I need all of me welcome. Um, so I appreciated coming to a space where it held the capacity. I would say it held all of the capacities of who I am, one as a Black woman and two as an ace Black woman. And that felt really, really powerful for me. And so I have to say, without intentionally trying to create that kind of space, how has it been for you to know that you have created this kind of space and knowing that it has become a safe space for people?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, because I think some of it, then what it points at is like the ways in which we curate the space, right? The processes, the language we use, the ways in which we even move through our processes can themselves be inviting or alienating for people, right? So uh, I think there are certain ways in which we've curated the sunset meditation space that just naturally signal like this is a space where we get to fully be in all of our identities, right? Even in the ways in which we check in, right? Our naming of like, immediate first thing we name is our names and gender pronouns, right? Or our connection to place, right? Where we are situated in the world, right? Our check-in questions often point at things that allow us to really share a depth of experience that maybe might not be necessarily welcome in some of the spaces that you're referencing. The ways that we like do the meditation practices themselves, we incorporate other modalities, other intuitive practices. We've got tarot, we've got astrology, depending on what's going on, right? Some of those things can come into the practice space, right? As a source of wisdom and knowledge that we can avail ourselves of, that our people always have, and so we don't have to necessarily be like, we kind of know when a space feels right, like, and that's kind of like, that's not to negate the importance of making explicit, right, for spaces that we are carving out space where you won't have to worry about X, Y, and Z because this is a space for us, and even if that's not the case, even if you're going to have an open space, there are practices that you can build into your space that make clear your commitments to like safety and welcoming in the space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I feel like I could talk to you forever, but like I'm looking at the time and I'm like, dang, I promise I would not keep you that long. So so before we head out, what is, and keeping in alignment with everything that we just shared, what is one final piece of advice that you would like to give someone, maybe your younger self, right? For unlearning these harmful teachings that we were kind of just talking about, from getting from these other spaces that did not welcome all of who we are, so that we could create more spaces that are truly healing and transforming or transformative for our communities, for our bodies to be in community space with one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, to my younger self, I would, I think one of the things that happens when we don't have spaces for us, right, in the expansiveness of who we are and the complexities of who we are and all our different interactions, is that we begin to feel less possible, right? And so, for my younger self, it would just be that affirmation that like, yes, you are possible, and you get to create and build and call into being the very spaces that you need, and folks will come, like you're not alone, even though sometimes it feels that way. you know, and I think that's a thing that, for example, we've talked about a ton in like the mystic soul space, you know, as I'm sure you remember, Lynette, is like for so many of us that are, you know, living and moving at the intersections of these, of, you know, of these different areas, like, and mysticism and healing practice and organizing, it feels like we're isolated and by ourselves. You know, we're like in the spaces where we feel like we're having to create from nothing and build our own paths. And it can be so powerful to just find like kindred spirits that you can like just even be like, yo, this is really hard, you know, and have somebody be like, I know, like, yo, you know, I had that, you know, but then also like collaborate, you know, think together, vision, you know. So that invitation to like know ourselves possible, right? But then for you know, and this for like folks that are holding space, and also for me, right, it's like this invitation to lean into discomfort.
Mm.
Right, I think sometimes the one of the ways that like spiritual bypassing shows up is that we trying to like skip over, you know, discomfort. And this is like one of the big tropes with meditation is like, you know, folks kind of feel like, well, like, you know, I'm gonna meditate and I'm gonna be perfectly still and I'm not gonna think and, you know, da, 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 da. And it's like that's not how it's gonna go. You know, like
Definitely
uh,
not.
actually you're gonna get still and you're gonna become very present to what's there, right? And that is gonna be uncomfortable at times, you know. We didn't get to really talk too much about meditation and anxiety. I know we wanted to get into that a little bit, but like part of one of the things, you know, part of what happens with anxiety often is that we are like in the past replaying things or in the future preparing for things, right? And it makes it really hard to like be in the present, right? And that's a very protective mechanism that our bodies, you know, in the wisdom of the body and the mind, you know, like we have developed this way to try to protect ourselves by making sure that we can be like protected from threat, you know. And that creates all kinds of reactions in the body. We can get activated in our fight flight responses because there's real threat that we have to deal with, right? For some of us that are living in constant assaults at our dignity or our physical well-being, or that can happen for so long that we become just like wired for constant like um apprehensiveness, right? For constant scanning for threats when they might not be present. So the meditation practice can help us to like come home to our bodies, right? To
Mm.
come home to the present moment, right? To tolerate um our own emotions and our own like physical sensations that felt like they were too much of a threat, so that if there are threats to be that need to be managed and dealt with, we can do so more choicefully, and we're not sort of stuck in whatever the automatic reactive protective mechanism that we developed, you know, is. Because with all that, with all the wisdom of that, because that, you know, thank everybody, that keeps us alive more often than not. It sometimes is not the best way for us to go, you know, like it's sometimes not the most useful or the most skillful. And so, you know, one of the ways that meditation can help is by helping us to become more able to be in the present moment, more able to be embodied fully, like in our bodies, more able to tolerate our own sensations so that we can be present to what's there, right? So that we can actually feel and heal through what's present and coming up to be felt, so that we can be more choiceful in the ways that we respond. Um, so I say that because this whole invitation of like lean into discomfort, like, you know, that can sometimes feel like the opposite of what we want to do. Many of us come to meditation, myself included, because we want to feel better, you know, because we want to feel less stressed, because we want to feel less anxious. And that can and probably will come. That is like one of the ways that meditation can help us. But also it allows us to learn how to actually be with ourselves, right? How to actually feel what's present, how to actually be in the moment, how to actually receive the information that that pain is trying to bring, right? Which is often pointing at what is hurting us, you know. And the same is true for like when you're having the intention of unlearning certain ways of being, right? Like you can't just skip over the messy part, right? There's the real messy part of like facing the things that have to be unlearned, right? Of sitting with like what it feels like to know, wow, I have this way of being that is not how I want to show up in the world. I need to learn how to show up differently. I need to probably practice showing up differently. That's not going to happen overnight. how do I be with the in-between, right? And meditation can help us to like just be with what is, right? To learn how to kind of like tolerate the discomfort. That discomfort can be a portal, right? To like actually the place that we want to go, you know? Um, when our physical bodies are healing, right? Like the wound has to like touch the air, and that's gonna burn a little bit,
Woo.
you know. And that doesn't mean if we try to keep that from happening, we might like smother it and get an infection, and that could actually cause more harm to the body, right? So how do we become able to like feel more, right? So that we can become freer, right? And I think meditation in my life has been really helpful for that. And you know, so lean into the discomfort. Don't try to skip over it.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's something I have to constantly remind myself. It's like, I don't want you to see this. I'm still working on it. I'm still tweaking. And it's kind of hard to do that sometimes. So
and I think that's that is kind of one of the products of this sort of apoliticized view of pain and healing, right? Is that it becomes very much our problem.
yeah.
Right? Like this is my pain. And oftentimes we make that implicitly mean like, or we're told explicitly, like, that's your problem. This is your fault, like, and the reality is when we start to share about these things with each other in community spaces, we very quickly hear that like, I ain't the only one.
Yeah.
And that means something else is happening here. Right. And how can we like figure that out together and look at what is actually the root causes of this pain that we're feeling? Why do we get taught that we have to be perfect in order to be loved? Right? That we have to be perfect in order to avoid being abandoned or discarded, right? Like that actually came from somewhere, and I resonate with that deeply because that's a thing that I internalized as well, and so it's hard and also just, so powerful to recognize that like when we're in community, we get to see a little bit bigger, and it's not just, obviously I'm a therapist, so I believe in like one-on-one therapy. I think that is really powerful for healing. And also it's not the only way that we heal, right? And actually our people have always been healing in community, so what happens when we're like, when we have a space where we can act, feel comfortable enough to share just a little bit more about what's happening with us so that we can realize and discover and be mirrors to each other that we are not alone in this and that we can actually support each other on our healing journey.
I would say true healing and true transformation. And you said the word earlier, we get free.
We get free.
So with that,
it's messy than that. It's messy. We get messy and we get free.
We get messy and we get free. Love it. Awesome. Alexis, thank you so much for your time today. I woke you up all early in the morning, like, come on, let's do this. We morning people.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chilling with you today.
Awesome. And well, everyone, thank you so much for listening and tuning in. I am going to attempt to highlight some of this stuff with writing. And if you would like to stay in contact or get to know more about Alexis and where Alexis hangs out, could you share that with us?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Alexis Francisco, or Instagram. It's ALXS Francisco is my handle at IG. And you can always shoot me an email, alexisfrancisco108@gmail.com. I'd be happy to be in communication with all of y'all. And those are the ways to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Awesome. And I appreciate you all being here. Until the next time, peace, love, and wellness. Take care,
Mhm.
everyone.